And I would like to introduce our speaker today. We are very happy to welcome Dr. Lara Jehi. She is a professor of neurology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine, specializing in epilepsy. Dr. Jehi is also the director of the Outcomes Research Program for Epilepsy and the Chief Research Information Officer for Cleveland Clinic. She has vast experience with multi-center projects in data science and NIH funding, and we are glad to have her here to present her talk titled Computational Approaches to Optimizing Clinical Trial Recruitment and Conduct. Thank you, Dr. Jehi, and I will let you begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan, and the organizers for inviting me. I will be looking forward to the question discussion component of the talk. It's always the most fun. So the talk will be structured around this outline. First, we'll have an academic topic overview, what's been published, theoretically, how things should work with using computation to help with clinical trials. This is I think of it as the clean portion of the talk. Then we will have a section that's about how does it really work in practice, the real world experience about using computation to help with clinical trials. And I'll share with you what we've done here in Cleveland Clinic. And then the last component will be more of a future outlook with where the field could be going. Let's start with the overview. In essence, the problem that we want to solve is that clinical trials now take too long and fail too often. There are papers written and books about this topic that explain it in a lot more detail using much more eloquent descriptions and languages. But really, this is what it boils down to. It is not right to be spending 7 years just going through phases 1, 2, 3 of a compound, and then spend, after you've already spent 6 years developing it, altogether, it's really over a decade, somewhere between 12 and 15 years that it takes from a compound being identified as a candidate for the treatment of a particular condition to when it is available on the market for people to use. And that's just too long. And it's not acceptable that most of those compounds, when we test them, end up being ineffective or too toxic. These are the statistics that we use to support those statements. Less than half of the clinical trials meet their enrollment targets. More than half of clinical trials end up closing early because of poor recruitment. So clearly, a big component of why this is taking too long and failing often is because we are slow in getting the patients recruited in sample sizes that are large enough for us to answer the question of, is this drug safe and is it effective? There are all kinds of other statistics that can support the hypothesis that this recruitment gap spans across multiple trial phases and disciplines. It is worst in cancer, one would say, maybe because it's the most studied over there, but in the cancer space, anywhere from 3 to 10% of patients are successfully enrolled in those clinical trials. More than 80% fail to meet their targets on their original timelines. And on average, trials are 30% slower than they should be in recruitment. From a conceptual perspective, we can reimagine the problem as being one where we are trying to condense a very big mess of data from electronic health record, from external systems, like, for example, the medication data in many healthcare systems. What you have within your electronic health record is the prescriptions that you sent, right? But you don't know whether the patients actually filled that medication or not. That fill data is available through external data sources that you would need to acquire separately and then link to your electronic health record to get that perspective. If you are looking at a condition that is very heavily driven by genetic data, like cancer or like some pediatric epilepsies, for example, or some neurodegenerative diseases that are genetically based. A lot of those genetic results actually come to you in the form of PDF documents, again, external to the electronic health record. And those are just a few examples of the mess of data that we need to filter through to identify if our patients are eligible or not to a clinical trial that we're considering. And right now, the funnel that all of that data is going through to make that eventual eligibility determination is manual. Coordinators, armies of coordinators being hired to sit in front of the electronic health record and just be reviewing charts and making those determinations. And the opportunity where
Timer for 2 minutes. All right.
excuse me?
Now.
Somebody.
Sorry.
Okay. So the opportunity that we have with computational tools like natural language processing and others is that we could theoretically bypass this bottleneck of the manual chart review. What we have to keep in mind there is that the advantage of why theoretically, are those machine learning approaches and natural language processing a good fit for such a challenge is because they are inherently designed, or at least we should use the ones that are inherently designed to work through this challenge of multifaceted data that needs to be analyzed, but also the longitudinal aspect of those data sets. So, for example, if we want to stick within the epilepsy space and we have some new medication that we are looking at that has a similar, that has a certain mechanism of action. Of course, it's defined. And we want to make sure that the patients that we test this new medication in should not have had any toxicity in the past related to similar medications. So you would end up with a list usually in the study criteria that says something like patient may have tried X, Y, or Z in the past, but should not have tried A, B, C, particularly within the last 6 months. So think of what that translates into when you are wanting to use a computational tool to filter through those patients and make that determination. You need to know, you need to be able to pick up that the patient tried or did not try a certain set of medications. But you also need your algorithm to be accurately linking that information to multiple points in time so you can get to that not within the past 6 months type of restriction. And this is why the typical processes that are used in healthcare systems to computationally identify cohorts for clinical trials most often fail. Because in most situations, the teams that you all go to request data to identify cohorts for the clinical trials that you want to run are teams that are used to pulling data for not necessarily for research. They do it for business purposes, for operational purposes, to look at hospital stay trends or emergency room visit trends. And, they pull all of that information from structured fields within the electronic health record. ICD codes, specific lab values, procedure codes. But the real wealth of the data is embedded within the text that is within the notes. And that is why you need approaches like machine learning and AI, natural language processing as an example, and then now these large language models, so that you can leverage those tools to go through that funnel of starting with the total patient population that's at your disposal and going from that to being able to continuously monitor those who are eligible and automate the chart abstraction, the patient identification and matching, so that ultimately you have the trial candidate. The alternative to this serial automation that I show on this slide is the status quo of queries that are done on structured fields within the electronic health record that are usually requested by the study teams from some central analytics or data provisioning service that exists in your organization, where typically you submit a query, you wait in line for that team to pull that query for you and give you a list of patients that might fit your study criteria. When it's done, just limited to those structured elements, typically what you get is a list of few hundred patients that your coordinator will have to go through manually. And then maybe if she's lucky, she might find 5 out of 500 who actually are a good fit for the study. By the time she did that, between that moment and when you originally submitted your request to that data team, typically a few months go by. And during that time, some patients, your determination is only based on what that cohort looked like when that single data pull was done. Patients are lost along the way. The coordinator is frustrated because she wasted time looking at patients that weren't really a good fit. The people who are querying the data for you are not happy because they know they're not doing a good job, and that's not really their job. That doesn't help anybody. But if you have an AI algorithm that can continuously run, so every day you refresh the data set because it is automatically interfacing with your electronic health record, then that query is running on a daily basis. And if it is pulling from the unstructured elements of the text, then it is providing that longitudinal look that we saw earlier, and the accuracy is much better. The list that your coordinator has to go through is much smaller, and it is not limited to the clinic that you are running, right? She's not looking at your schedule in Epic to find manually which of the patients that you have might fit your criteria. The AI is running on all patients in your healthcare system. So it will find, say, your diabetes patient when they happen to be seeing their primary care physician for a follow-up this week. It doesn't have to wait until they come through your doors in your clinic. So you're expanding the pool that you are querying from. You are doing your query more often, and you are doing it in a more targeted way. And that is why this funnel gets smaller and smaller with computational approaches to the subject identification. And it ends up being very accurate. I'll share with you more about this particular paper, but this is accuracy that we published using a computational approach to match patients for a very rare cardiac study. It was cardiac amyloidosis, and these patients were very far in between, and the coordinators had spent a lot of time trying to find them. And with this approach that we had, the list that we got was actually 96% accurate when they reached out to match the patients. This is the paper I'm talking about. So not only was it that 96% accuracy, it also gave us two benefits that I sort of alluded to. The first benefit was it was that identified patients that otherwise we wouldn't have, because those were patients who hadn't even been seen in the particular clinic that the study was running at. So when we compared the AI system that we used to the routine screening approach of the coordinators looking at the electronic health record and trying to find the patients, in the routine screening approach, 93% of the patients that were identified for the study were folks who were already established in that particular heart failure clinic. Versus with the AI system, only 60% of them were established with that particular office. Close to half of them were patients who were still being seen in our regional facilities. So Cleveland Clinic, we have 220 clinics all around the main campus that we see patients in. And all of those patients are losing out on the opportunity to participate in clinical trials following the routine screening approach that based on this information. But with the AI approach, we were able to find them, and then their clinicians had the chance to tell them about the study and then get them enrolled. So that is the expanding the pool of patients that can participate. The second benefit was increasing the diversity of that pool. You see, with the routine screening, 7% of the trial participants were Black. With that AI system, we bumped that up to close to 37%, which is actually a number that is much closer to the demographic racial distribution in the Cleveland area than the 7% number is. So the study population became more reflective of the demographics of the community that we live in. What's important to keep in mind in all of this is that it's the junk in, junk out concept, right? So it's really important that the data that we are using to make those determinations is as accurate as it can be. And that's why it's really important to mirror all of this effort in developing and deploying these algorithms with efforts to standardize and increase the validity and the quality of the real-world data that we are entering into the system. It's also important that we address many of the known risks of these computational approaches. So first being the fact that the algorithms just perpetuate the biases of what went into training them. So we have to be aware of that and be careful not to generate skewed cohorts that come out of this, and be intentional about fairness evaluations that we put those through. We have to be cognizant of the incompleteness of the data and follow standards to make sure that we address it. I'll give you a practical example of that one, actually. So in the context of this cardiac amyloidosis study that I mentioned, I was running that pilot in parallel to another one that was in the cancer space. And it's the same entity, that we were collaborating with. And the algorithm was in the cancer group giving us this 96% accuracy, like right out the door. And with the cardiac studies, it was like struggling with 70. I'm like, what's 70%? Like, what's wrong? There is something that's wrong. And then when we dug into it, it turned out that the issue was that in the cardiac space, when many of the studies have specific requirements for ejection fraction or some other measures that are all echo measures, those are key eligibility criteria. Yet it turned out that on the back end, with the way our electronic health record was constructed, the echo data was all living in a separate silo, in a separate database that wasn't automatically synchronizing with the Clarity, the electronic health record pool that we were pulling the information from. So when the algorithm was running, it wasn't seeing any of the echo data, and that's why it wasn't giving us the correct information. When we realized that and made the right connections, the accuracy jumped, and then we were good. So always question, are these algorithms pulling from where they need to generate their results? And of course, there is the other issues that you see on the slide. Ultimately, the hope, the dream, is that we have this AI filtration layer that can work through all of these challenges and the millions of the unstructured data points that we have in our electronic health record and everything else that it links to come out with a very clean strategic identification of ideal subjects, participants to include in our clinical trials. So this is the clean part of the talk, what you can read in papers and what you can hear in talks everywhere. Let me give you now an example, like how does it really work? So up until now, I was wearing my academician hat, right? Now let me wear my Chief Research Information Officer hat, which is the hat of the executive in your healthcare system who is going to be making decisions as to, yes, you can run this AI platform or you cannot run this AI platform and make it happen, right? So after we publish the paper and after we develop these algorithms that we can give talks about and show how we were very accurate in identifying a specific set of patients for like whatever we're studying. How is it that paper can then translate into a tool that any researcher anywhere in the world can actually use on their computer to help them do the same thing? How can you expand the benefit to an actual benefit rather than I just got the paper published, right? So, and that is a real, can you still see me? Am I still through? Are you still hearing me?
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
okay,
hearing you.
okay, very
I don't know
good.
what
I just
happened,
got
but
something on my screen. Yeah, okay. So we were talking about
we're
the
good.
transition between, an academic point to an implementation and the deployment point. And that is an actual challenge now with deploying AI algorithms, computational tools in general in research and in healthcare. So you see some stats in here. 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. They're never really making it past the pilot stage. And the proportion of healthcare systems that are just scrapping AI initiatives from their roadmaps just went up from 17% to 42% in the span of 1 year. So these types of numbers can raise a red flag about, like, a sense of disillusionment or a challenge that healthcare systems are facing in deploying useful, or what they would perceive as useful, AI algorithms in real practice. We have to get past that if we are to use these AI algorithms for research, clinical trials included. And these are the reasons why. The algorithm itself is usually not the issue. It's actually almost never the issue. The failure of deployments is rarely the model. It is usually the system that we have around it. It's because it's not well integrated in the workflow. Everybody's busy. Nobody's going to take an extra 10 seconds to go somewhere outside of whatever platform they're using. Say you're in clinic and you want to see if your colleague is a PI on a clinical trial and they need your help to tell them if you're seeing patients that might be good candidates. You are very busy. If you have to, with every patient, go outside of your encounter and click on some other platform and enter data related to this one patient that you're seeing to see if they are a good match for your colleague study, even for your own study, you're not going to do that, even if it's just like a 30-second exercise, because those are 30 seconds you don't have because you need to go and move to your next patient. Whatever that platform, that algorithm that needs to give that information has to be integrated in your workflow. Otherwise, you won't use it. Clinicians don't necessarily trust output that they get without an explanation of how that AI platform gave it to them, right? Like, why should I believe it? I don't understand how it came up to that conclusion. The governance paralysis is real. Whenever any platform needs to be deployed in a hospital, the number of committees that it needs to go through, the number of approvals that it needs to get, there isn't a single decision maker who can override it all and say, yes, I agree, I certify, or I say this, the cyber risks or the data leakage risks are worth it and we should do this. And these platforms, end up in this endless cycle of committees before anybody can get a decision. The vendor first, not problem first step issue is also a very real one. In a healthcare system, many times what happens is somebody knows a company and then that company says they have a good thing to do. And then they come and they're a hammer looking for a nail to solve. And that's never really a good thing. Spoke about the operational ownership is, say we like it and then we want to deploy it, who's going to make sure it's always working right? And if there are issues that they need to be solved, what team is that going to fall under? And so that's why there is all of these considerations that need to be practically factored in before scaling an AI platform to actual use need to be done. And when I say scaling, this is what I mean by that. So in the organization that I'm in, my job is to oversee technology and research across the health system. And this is the health system. It is 15 million patient encounters per year, a place where we have over 300,000 surgeries that happen every year. And that spans 3 continents where the rules, the policies, the regulation on AI, data ownership are different in the US. Even within the US, what I can do in Ohio is very different from what I can do in Florida. London, we have to deal with their GDPR, their data regulations that are much more restrictive than here in the US. And then there is Abu Dhabi, which is a completely different animal. So when we say we want to deploy an AI platform to help with clinical trial enrollment, we have to be able to figure out how we're doing that across all of those locations. It's not enough to have a nice paper that said an algorithm was good. And there's a lot of research that happens. So what is relevant for this talk is that there is over 800 clinical trials that are going on in Cleveland Clinic at any point in time. So again, how do we serve all of those with a computational platform? Here's how we, this is at least my approach. Some may like it, some may not, but practically, this is what I went through to get this AI platform with that 96% accuracy that I mentioned earlier deployed. And now it's there, and all of Cleveland Clinic is using it. The first step was defining the problem. Defining the problem, there is all of those stats that we looked at with that initial part of the talk, which was the clean part of the talk. None of those numbers would have helped me in the deployment because the problem has to be context specific, has to be institution specific. So this is how we defined it. We looked at within Cleveland Clinic, within our different institutes, we're organized around the organ-based institutes, so Neuro Institute, Cardiovascular, Cancer, etc. Within each one of us, how many patients did we commit to for sponsored clinical trials? How many did we actually recruit? And made the problem real. Our number mirrors the 50% that I mentioned earlier, but it was 51.7% in our case of how often we're meeting our enrollment goals. But we had to do that because the public number would have gone nowhere in getting the institutional commitment for the investment that's necessary to invest and deploy the AI algorithm that we needed. Step 2 was defining the implications of this inadequate enrollment for each stakeholder that needs to buy into the plan of deploying, what this company was offering, these large language models. For finance, the conversation was, look at this. We are leaving $27 million on the table every year with inadequate enrollment. This is money that we should capture. So, because finance, that's really what they care about. And we needed to convince them to invest into acquiring and deploying this platform. For the research team, the value proposition is different for each group. For the coordinators, it was, oh, you guys are working so hard, all this time, half of your time is going into manually looking at Epic. Wouldn't it be nice, if we get this list and then instead of looking at Epic, you can spend this time with the patients and getting them through the study procedures. Like you did this, you went into this research business because you would like people, not because you want Epic. For the investigators, it was, oh, you're spending so much time building these protocols and planning and negotiating with the sponsors only to find after this is up and running that you can't actually recruit. If we have a platform that can help you better design your protocol so that you can actually recruit for it, your time will be better spent. For the data and analytics team, you don't have to worry anymore about clinical trials. They're taking up so much of your time. You can then focus on other research questions. For regulatory, IRB, and others, you should prioritize these pilot studies that we want to do to look at this recruitment platform, because right now, a third of the trials that you are reviewing are actually never recruiting. So it's helpful to you if you work with us and invest in the time. See, so because at the end of the day, to deploy this platform at this scale, all of those entities have to buy in. Finance has to pay for it. The research teams have to see value to use it. The analytics teams should be on board so they don't block it. And if we need them to reconcile and consolidate the data sets, they have to be on board with doing that. Regulatory is important because all of you who know research know if you have any technology piece in your IRB application, then you go through the black hole of cyber and review to make sure that this is safe and whatnot. So think about all those things up front and then engage all of those groups in the planning for the evaluation. Then step 3 is define exactly how this technology can help. So be explicit. This is better than what we have right now because of the daily refresh for the changing characteristics of the patients. It reads the patient's longitudinal history. It provides us with an auditable trail of the justification. So it is explainable. You will understand why, you got these patients list, and you will make the ultimate determination of whether this was a good fit or not. So the human in the loop. And you show examples of how this would look like. So in this particular one that we co-developed and we're using, you see for each study criterion if this patient is a good fit or not. And if you click on that, it takes you directly to the part of the notes that it used to make that assessment. You like it, you don't like it, at least you can understand how it came to be. Step 4 is you find local champions and complete these pilot studies. You don't believe anybody at face value. You have to test these algorithms in your own environments. So in our example, I found a champion in heart and then one in cancer. And it is worked with them to develop these steps that you see here. Test the platform and its application, the team that will be best suited for the deployment, how to integrate it in the workflow, work through all those kinks before you get it to the point of, okay, yes, this is something we want to deploy. When we did those pilots, we got these great results. The coordinators, on average, every coordinator was taking 5 months to find one patient for that particular study. With the algorithm, we had 22 patients in 1 week, right? So 1 human, 5 months, 1 patient versus 1 human, 1 week with the algorithm, 22 patients were a match. This trial ended up closing early, and we were the highest recruiter, and we moved on to the next piece, to the next trial, the phase 3. Step 5 now, you say you did all of this, and now you're happy that this platform actually delivers on what you wanted to deliver. Now you have to plan for, let's do it for everybody, not just for these 2 groups in this pilot. And there's a lot that goes into that. A pilot is something that you usually can run with your existing infrastructure. For a larger, a wider rollout, typically you need to add servers and compute, meaning we didn't need extra GPUs to run these large language models just on a cohort of heart patients. But if we wanted to run it across all the disease areas, across more than just 1 or 2 clinical trials at a time, we need to buy extra GPUs. We need to dedicate additional servers for this use. And that's a lot of money. That's a big investment. We could run workforce. We could run these pilots with just me talking to the investigators, like doing my thing on my own. But these were just 2 trials. When we have the 800 that are going and say we want to use this platform for over, our goal was 25 trials in the first year, go up to 50 and then 100 the year after, you need then to have a team that is dedicated to just making this happen. Regulatory, I got a separate IRB approval for the pilots to do it, but there is no way that we can expect each one of the trials that will use it at scale to have to justify to the IRB over and over again that they're using this. So we have to work with the IRB for an umbrella review. Legal, again, It has to be a master agreement, cannot be per pilot. And you go down through that list, and you see that there are many steps that differentiate a pilot rollout from one that is actual meaningful use. And that requires the resources. So you have to then secure these resources for this enterprise rollout. And that's where, like we do a lot of these, flow charts and waterfall charts, they're called, to show the finance people that this investment makes sense. And then you develop the workflow, communicate it, train all these hundreds of investigators and deploy it. So the workflow is defined. You come up with these things like, the timeline for the deployment, what disciplines. You create a website that has education, on the platform and tutorials, videos that people can watch. So and then you always, after you do all of that, you always reevaluate, so this one paper is one example that there is many others that are in the works, because you have to always make sure that this is working. So this is the real world, how we have been able to take advantage of these computational tools to match, to better enroll and conduct these trials. What are we looking at for the future? Now here, this is like really far into the future, but we're there. We are looking at quantum computing applications for clinical trials. Quantum computing is this completely different approach at doing computation. And at Cleveland Clinic here, we have the only quantum computer that is, anywhere globally, really, that's fully dedicated to life sciences research. And one of the applications that we're looking at for it is for clinical trial design and optimization. This is another paper from a group that we got together across industry and other academic institutions to specifically address this question. Quantum, you can think of it as a computing approach that starts where AI fails. So we looked at all of the different challenges in clinical trials, whether it's the protocol design, optimizing the rollouts, or identifying the cohorts where AI approaches are now being used, identified what gaps these approaches have, and then looked to see how quantum could theoretically help. And we did that by mapping these challenges to the quantum algorithms that now exist. So on a protocol design angle, for example, these many of the the endpoints determinations or the dosing determinations that are done rely on analysis of multiple sources of data. So the biological system properties, the drug properties, how does the protein fit with the the drug fit with the ligand, all those things. So the computational space is just huge. And that is challenging when you apply AI approaches to it. So we are looking at ways that quantum approaches could help with that issue. Site selection is another one where here it's called the traveling salesman problem, where if you are a salesman and you're going from house to house to sell your stuff, if all you have to go visit is like 5 houses, you can plan your trajectory very well in the morning and make it back home early, right? But it becomes really difficult if you have to figure out what's the fastest way of you visiting 25 homes every day and still make it early. That computation becomes much more difficult. In clinical trial deployments, the sponsors have to do a similar calculation with what would be the best 30, 40 sites that I need to enroll my study, to use for my study to finish it early. And figuring out that computational problem is something that some quantum algorithms are uniquely suited for. Same thing with cohort identification, defining the study criteria that you would need to use. So the main takeaways here are these three. So if you just want to remember three things from everything I said, first, recruitment failure is really responsible for most of the delay that we are now facing with clinical trials, completing them successfully. There are many reasons and pieces of hypothetical reasons and actual evidence to support that AI can dramatically improve efficiency, accuracy, and with that timeline compression. Third, that none of the above is relevant in practice if we don't know how to work within the institutions that we live in to translate those interests into impact, right? With working through integrating, governing, and building the clinician trust in using those tools. And there's, of course, many future directions that this can go into. I will stop here. These are the references, but I will stop sharing so that we can have a discussion.
Thank you so much. Great presentation. And we have good time for questions here. So we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but people can feel free to put them in or they can unmute and we can discuss out loud.
Lara, I'm impressed with the slide that showed the tens of thousands of people filtering down to 22. So that is amazing. When dealing with rare diseases, I guess, AI techniques can be used to drill into multiple patient databases. Is that kind of where that 100,000 or tens of thousands of people came from, by combining different pre-existing databases?
In a sense, Mark, but it came from combining, not I would say databases, but sites, right? So with the traditional approach, these coordinators were just looking at the patients being seen at the main campus, and particularly in the cardiology clinic. So they have within cardiology, there's a clinic that's an amyloidosis clinic. So they were just looking at those patients. But think of in real life, what would have happened, the patient who's seen in the region should have had a referral to cardiology main campus. And then even within that, another referral to amyloidosis clinic. And then, to make it in that, what the coordinators were looking at. But what happened with this AI platform was that now we are looking at any patient within our region. So main campus plus all of these clinics that we have out there. So that's where the initial thousands came from. And those were just the patients who had a heart disease diagnosis, just like cardiac. Not necessarily amyloidosis, so that's the starting point, because you have to limit somehow what you're running the LLM on. You can't just run it on everything.
Right.
So we had some initial definitions for what we're narrowing it towards. So it's just a few thousand patients. And then we ran the LLM, and then it came to the 22.
Yeah. I think as things develop, one of the things that I'm seeing from this filtering process is that there's a bunch of kind of, as that funnel grows smaller and as you come to the point of the funnel, the rejects maybe represent patients who perhaps are not well characterized or perhaps can be better diagnosed. So I think that's one of the side effects that may come from these large language things where patients are fitting descriptions but don't fit the exact label yet, you know? So I wonder if that's going to be a future development. That's not something you addressed there, but that's where I see kind of a potential to help folks as a side effect of AI, a good side effect of AI, which still makes me shudder a little bit. But
Yeah, there is a group. It's funny you say that. There's a group here in our GI department that are developing an internal AI, algorithm to help them pre-screen patients before they establish clinical care, and then
yes.
suggest like what tests to order. And when that lady was presenting to me, she goes, the whole thing was AI versus GI, like that. That's how.
Oh,
Like, just you don't have to rub it in. But yes, you bring up a very good point, which is that what we're I sort of alluded to it there with how important it is to refine our real world data that we're
right.
using, right? What we're realizing is that um, the AI is really only as good as what it's seeing, right? So if we have
Yes.
clinician notes where one clinician is saying this patient is stage 3, and then another clinician note within that same time frame, right, saw the same patient and said this is stage 2. Like, what's the AI going to do? We can't
Right.
agree among ourselves and
Right.
how, this is class, and this is not hypothetical. I mean, those are real.
Does,
So,
yes.
right? So part of this, what we do in our deployment with this platform, there is an initial build phase, we call it, where the team sits with the investigators and agrees with them on how are the study criteria actually defined internally. So like it says diagnosis of diabetes since whatever. Okay, well, so what does the investigator hear when they read that particular criteria, eligibility, criterion, and agree with the AI team on that upfront, so that we're not building and then rebuilding algorithms, right? Like we build it once and then we deploy it for
Right.
that particular study. Otherwise, it can be an endless cycle, right? The one problem that this is not solving, I mean, there are many, but the more immediate one is that we are providing the lists to those coordinators, but we don't really know what they're doing with them. Like there are some teams that have their act together where they know exactly that when the coordinator gets this list, she's going to say, call the patients, or she's
Right.
going to work with the PI to follow up. But not all the teams are organized that way, so I'm now tracking them to see what are they doing with those lists after they get them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So the thing that I wanted, why I asked you to give this talk is that this is a very practical solution to a very real problem. But as we're finding out, AI has just sped up humans, and humans are faulty. and but so the speeding up process, I think, is very valid and very valuable, and I commend y'all's work in that. But you're right. Once it comes down to those 22 patients or the 100 patients, there's still that last mile delivery problem that has to be manually filtered through, and the stage 2 and the stage 3 thoughtfully sorted out and addressed for proper recruiting. So I think AI perhaps again is more of an adjunct than an answer, and that's the way I see it. And I hope to learn from you in developing our own trials, because that, we have a new part of the clinical trial methodology course in really emphasizing retention and recruitment and thoughtful use of inclusion and exclusion criteria to properly, undertake the actual doing the trial. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you coming and sharing your experience with this. You're on the cutting edge of this stuff, so very good.
Thank you, Mark. This is for all the feedback. And you're absolutely right. The next step is how do we marry these algorithms with better ways to predict who's eventually going to enroll, right? So these 22 may all fulfill the study criteria, but
Mhm.
are they going to say yes when approached? That's a different question. And
So,
if they say yes, are they going to stick with it? That's another question.
yeah.
One use in the design side of things that we're looking at now with this platform is we are using it to simulate
Mhm.
how well the study would enroll before we finalize the protocol, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
because we develop our internal eligibility criteria for the study before we finalize them, we can take a run with this platform and see, okay, if these were the criteria, how many patients would we actually find? And it tells us which of these criteria are the most problematic. So then we can focus and look at it again and see if we can revise it in a way that would still answer the scientific question, but maybe open up enrollment more. So that emulation before finalizing the protocol is a functionality that's been really good.
Thank you. All right, we're at the 59th minute of the hour. Again, I appreciate you doing this. Your expertise is obvious. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, guys, have it's a beautiful day outside, so I hope you're wrapping up your Fridays. And very good.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.